The Washington Post is an extraordinarily biased source. It has been an extraordinarily biased source for many, many years. But I have to say, this may be the worst major media correction I have ever seen in my life. It's pretty astonishing. So you will recall that way back in December, the Washington Post reported a call. The call was supposed to be between President Trump and a Georgia investigator. Okay, and that Georgia investigator, he apparently told, according to the Washington Post, that this Georgia investigator would be, quote, a national hero if they found the fraud. He apparently encouraged this Georgia investigator to, quote unquote, find the fraud and said they would be a national hero if they did so. Okay, now it turns out that those quotes were entirely fabricated, like top to bottom, made up. According to the Washington Post correction, quote, 2 months after publication of this story, the Georgia Secretary of State released an audio recording of President Donald Trump's December phone call with the state's top elections investigator. The recording revealed that the Post misquoted Trump's comments on the call based on information provided by a source. So in other words, they talked to a single source who was supposedly privy to the phone call. That person made up quotes. The Washington Post simply quoted that source without any sort of actual sourcing. And then when the phone call broke, as in like a couple of months after the story, when it broke in February, March, then it turned out none of this was on the phone call, and the Washington Post had to retract basically the center of the story. Now, this is a separate phone call from the one that happened that we all heard the audio of President Trump and Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State. At the time, I said it was easy to mischaracterize that conversation as Trump telling Raffensperger that he needed to find votes somewhere that were fraudulent. It was the opposite, right? What he was saying in that phone call was he believed, I think baselessly, that there were a bunch of votes in Georgia that were improper and that Raffensperger was ignoring that evidence and he was encouraging to go find the evidence that Trump thought existed. But you could read it the other way. But something that certainly never happened that we know at this point is that Trump never said that you would be a quote unquote national hero if you find the fraud. He didn't tell the investigator to find the fraud or say that she would be a quote national hero if she did so. Instead, Trump urged the investigator to scrutinize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, asserting she would find dishonesty there. He also told her she had the most important job in the country right now. The headline and text of the Post report have now been corrected to remove quotes misattributed to Trump, the newspaper says. I mean, you know how dangerous that is? Seriously, like as a matter of journalism, you know how crazy it is that you had quotes in a headline that were attributed to the president of the United States based on a single unnamed source? And it turns out that it was just a lie. It was just made up. The correction comes days after the Wall Street Journal obtained audio of the December call between Trump and the investigator. Trump told Francis Watson, the chief investigator of the Georgia Secretary of State's office, quote, when the right answer comes out, you'll be praised. Watson reportedly responded, I can assure you that our team and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, we are only interested in the truth and finding information based on the facts. The original Post report, according to The Hill, shook the political world just days after the January 5th runoff elections in Georgia, a contest both Republican senators lost, giving Democrats the majority in the upper chamber. The original Post report was covered widely by many media outlets, including The Hill, which has also updated its report on the Trump call. Okay, now here is the thing that's amazing. You will remember that there were other outlets that then confirmed the Post's reporting. So what happened is the Post reported stuff that wasn't true. And then it turns out that they had to walk that back. But at the time, after the Post reported that Trump had said, find the fraud and you'll be a national hero if you do so, at the time, there were other outlets that confirmed the reporting. And that led people who watch the media to say, okay, well, if you have a bunch of outlets that are now confirming the same story, well, now you can pretty much guarantee that the story is true. Except, what if that's not true? What if the way that the media now do business when there is a Republican president is they find an anonymous source, that anonymous source then tells their story to the Washington Post, and then that same exact anonymous source goes over to CBS News and says that exact same untrue story, and then CBS News says, based on our source, we can also confirm that we have heard that the story is true. So basically, you now have a single source who is dictating news to a wide variety of mainstream media outlets. And because these mainstream media outlets are granting these people the privilege of speaking on background, meaning anonymously, this means there is no way to confirm whether you have more than one source confirming the story is true. Right? Normally, when you have the Washington Post make a report and then the New York Times confirms that report, the assumption is that there is one source for the New York Times and one source for the Washington Post. And so multiple sources have now double sourcing is the way that journalism is supposed to work. You're supposed to have two sources who corroborate a report, not just one. Okay, but the way that the media now work is one anonymous source goes to the Washington Post and says something that's untrue. That same person, because they've now been quoted anonymously in the Washington Post, the same person now goes to the New York Times, tells the exact same story, and the New York Times says, we can confirm the Washington Post reporting. But can you? Because apparently you're now, like, how many stories have been laundered into multiple outlets by one person? I'm sure that this has happened multiple times. If this happened one time, it happened many times. According to the Daily Wire, Real Clear Investigation senior writer Mark Hemingway says this kind of mistake is beyond serious. There's zero accountability in major corporate media, yet they continually insist they're the ones holding the line on the truth. And always remember, what should scare you about the media is what doesn't get exposed. Note the headline on the Post follow-up story is sort of maliciously anodyne. Recording reveals details of Trump call to Georgia's chief elections investigator. It's not. Trump's remarks grossly misrepresented across media because we credulously fall for political ops. Mary Catherine Ham of CNN, she says that somebody should lose their job. She said, so they made up quotes. Wasn't the actual F? The header for the story could be a little clearer, like, our bad, we made fake news that led the national news for weeks, and this audio proves it. For those in my timeline asking if it really matters because Trump is bad anyway, yes, it really matters. Quotes being correct matters a lot. Don't you see that's the issue? If a reporter is so dead sure that, quote, Trump bad anyway, he is less inclined to question or vet his own stories. And don't give me the corrections are an example of the system working stuff. Sometimes they are. Here, they're coming in 3 months later when they are outed by a recording, and the correction and new story are designed to downplay as much as possible, not blare as loudly as the original. Again, it's a pretty amazing thing. So they directly misattributed quotes. They didn't paraphrase, right? They put it in quotation marks. They said Trump said X. Trump never said X. They did it based on anonymous sourcing. And then they laundered that into multiple media outlets. And this was, by the way, this was quoted in the impeachment papers for Trump the second time around. That report was quoted in the impeachment papers. I think it was charge 10 in the impeachment papers. Okay, that's pretty unbelievable. So they laundered a false piece of news into an impeachment. And then they wonder why we don't trust them. Then they wonder why the credibility of the media is on edge. It also demonstrates full scale that the fact-checking media are just garbage. It shows that the fact-checking media are willing to cover for pretty much anything so long as it comes from one of their buddies. Because the way that this works is that if you are a member of the establishment-approved media, you can say anything, and your fact-checking buddies will cover up for you. But if you're a member of the non-establishment media, then they will come after you with a pickaxe for saying something that is true, but they disagree with. It really is an impressive show here. And the fact, again, that the Washington Post blew this story so badly, and the fact that the entire media are now rushing to the defense of the Washington Post should tell you something. It should tell you something. So it is pretty amazing. Again, the original Washington Post story did break, I believe on January 6th is when it originally broke. Or, I'm sorry, the original news was broken before January 6th. And January 5th, it was before the Georgia runoff, I believe. So it may have had an impact on an incredibly tight Georgia runoff election. That's not exactly a shocker. Glenn Kessler, the Washington Post fact checker, he said the Washington Post reporting on Trump's call to the Georgia Secretary of State, undisputed as the audio tape was obtained from the start, was the article cited in the impeachment article. Trump naturally pretends otherwise. But that's not actually true. Actually, they actually refer to, I believe, both stories. So, impressive showing by the media. But this is what our media are now. CNN spends all day just covering Fox News. That's all the media do. The media cover people in conservative news, and they report false stories, and they launder the false stories through multiple media outlets, and then they give themselves nice fact checks. Very, very convenient stuff for our mainstream media who are doing an excellent job journalisming, because this is what they do. And again, the false news always rockets around Earth faster than the real news. You wonder why President Trump had a lot of ground to cover. He had such fertile ground when he would talk about fake news. The answer is because we in the conservative community have known for decades that the media do this kind of crap. Okay, this goes well back before Bernard Goldberg put out the book Bias in the early 2000s. I remember my parents canceling their subscription to the Los Angeles Times in the mid-90s over the Los Angeles Times running a picture of a supposedly Palestinian man supposedly being beaten by an Israeli soldier on their front page. The caption was false. It turned out that it was a man attempting to escape Palestinian rock throwers and an Israeli soldier shouting at the people trying to throw rocks at the guy. The fake news has been a thing for quite a while, and all the mistakes are in one direction. When is the last time they made a mistake in the direction of conservatives? Can you name one? I mean, literally one. Can you name a mistake that has been made in the direction of Republicans? The answer, of course, is no. And these kind of stories happen regularly. People lose their jobs over this kind of stuff. I mean, we've talked on this program in the past several weeks about the media simply taking comments by particular people and then deliberately misinterpreting them to get them fired. There's an entire Washington Post story that came on the heels of a Georgetown professor being fired for saying something not racist, and the entire angle of the story is that it was racist. There are a couple of types of bias that the media can go through. One is selection bias, what they cover and what they don't. They won't cover Andrew Cuomo being a corrupt tool bag until a couple of months after the election. Then they'll start covering it. So selection bias is one thing. And then there is the way they cover stories, right? The angle of the story. That is another area of bias. And then the third is the worst kind of bias. And that is where they will just believe whatever confirms their priors. And then they will just report that credulously out. And then later, if they get it wrong, they'll walk it back. Let's not pretend that these folks have any stake in the objective truth. When I say these folks, I don't mean everybody in the media, but there are enough of them that it is indicative of a broader problem in the media they refuse to face up to. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.